Hello, everyone, and welcome. My name is Jenna B. Morgan, and I am an associate professor of English at Motlow State Community College. I am so thrilled to be here today introducing two authors, Bradley Sides and Andrew Siegrist. Before we get into our conversation with them, I have a few announcements. I'm going to gush for no more than 30 seconds and then briefly introduce our authors. First, all of you, welcome to the 33rd Annual Southern Festival of Books on behalf of Humanities Tennessee. And thank you to all the generous sponsors who make this festival free and accessible to everyone. The Metro Nashville Arts Commission, Ingram Content Group, the Tennessee Arts Commission, Vanderbilt, Parnassus Books. These sponsors help keep it free, but so can we. You can do your part by purchasing books directly from Parnassus after the festival, and you can make donations to Humanities Tennessee at their website. If you're watching on YouTube or Facebook, you can post questions in the comments, and we will have time for those at the end of the session today. Post those just as you would for any other event. I want to thank the authors for being here today, and also for their beautiful books. I've had the real pleasure over the last couple of weeks of immersing myself in these books. I also want to take a second to thank whoever at the festival put these together. These books share some common blood. They are cousins. There are these images that echo through both books. It was such a pleasure to watch fireflies and feathers and collections in mason jars echo back and forth as I read. It was kind of remarkable, actually. And the characters I got to meet. In Side's book, a budding Sasquatch hunter and space aliens bearing healing flowers, and a pod of polyamorous mermaids, and a werewolf dad who's revoking his son's phone privileges. And then I would flip over to Siegrist's book, and I would meet a fire-eating father and a disillusioned preacher feeding communion wafers to fish, and an artist who paints with rain, and a girl with eyelashes so long they can be braided. All these characters are now walking around together in my head, and it's quite the party. I'm so excited that we're going to learn a little more about them today from our authors. Bradley Sides' writing appears at Chapter 16, Electric Literature, Los Angeles Review of Books, the Millions and Southern Review of Books. He holds an MA from the University of North Alabama and is an MFA candidate at Queen's University of Charlotte, where he serves as the fiction editor of QU Literary Magazine. He lives in Florence, Alabama with his wife, and he can be found most days teaching English and creative writing in Southern Tennessee. Those Fantastic Lives is his debut. And I just learned as I was speaking with him before the session, this is his first reading from the book, which just came out about a week ago. Andrew Siegrist is a graduate of the Creative Workshop at the University of New Orleans. His work has appeared in the Baltimore Review, Arts and Letters, the Greensboro Review, Pembroke Magazine, Fiction Southeast, Bat City Review, and elsewhere. He lives on the Cumberland River outside of Nashville. His debut collection, We Imagined It Was Rain, is the winner of the 2020 C. Michael Curtis Short Story Book Prize. So also a debut collection and also a debut reading. What a treat for us here at the festival. They're both going to read a little bit and talk about their books. And I believe, Andrew, you volunteered to go first.
Thank you, Jenna. I'm going to read a very short piece called Rain Painting. The summer we lived with Dad, there was a neighbor whose voice we never heard. We'd seen him walking through the woods, fingers brushing the bark of trees or rustling the leaves of bushes, collecting berries in a paper sack. Sometimes he crouched in the creek bed and picked red pebbles from the cool water. He moved slow, always quiet, and often stopped as if listening to things we couldn't hear, like roots growing deep beneath him, the crack of a bird's egg in a high-up nest. Once we drove by him on the gravel road near our house. He stepped into the ditch and waited for us to pass. Dad raised 2 fingers from the steering wheel, and the man lifted his hand to his forehead. Waving hello or shading his eyes from the sun, we couldn't tell. The rain painter, Dad said, watching the rearview mirror. When we asked what he meant, he told us he'd show us, but we'd have to wait. We stayed up late that night making up stories. The rain painter standing beneath a heavy sky, wetting his brush with storm water, slashing at a canvas until something evil took shape. We listened with our ears pressed against the window for some promise of rain to break loose from the sky, some spark to waken the dark world. And if it had, we'd have been afraid to open our eyes, afraid the stories we told were true. The next morning, we walked past our house carrying a stack of folded sheets. "What's he doing?" we said. "Getting ready for the rain," Dad said. Dad had been checking the weather every night after calling Mom behind a closed door. We'd lie on the floor outside his room and listen as he begged for another few more days. When the storm came, Dad called in sick to work. With the first tinks of rain on the roof, he told us to hurry. We followed him through the woods that were thick with the smell of rain. The air had cooled. We reached out our hands and felt the trees bark as we ran. Dad stopped and pointed to the canopy of the woods. "Sheets," he said. We ran in circles beneath sheets that were hung between branches so high above us. Each sheet stained a different color. We outstretched our arms, our palms catching all different colors of rain. The strange rain dripped from our hair and down our faces, reds and blues and purples. We opened our mouths and tasted it. Some sheets were heavy with the weight of picked berries, others colored with the dust of crushed creek pebbles. When the rain lightened, our clothes were stained, our tongue and teeth carnival colored. We were laughing. Dad stood far away, watching silently. The next morning, we slipped back into the stained clothes we had begged him not to wash. And when Mom picked us up, she shook her head. "Couldn't even keep them clean," she said before taking us away. That's it. Thank you.
So I will read from my collection a story called The Creator. It's probably the shortest story in my collection, but I think it really kind of sums up what the rest of it's about. It's about loss, loneliness, has some hints of magic in it. So this is The Creator. When he folds along the lines, he is still. Before this moment, he hasn't felt at peace since before her eyes closed far too soon. What he meticulously creates isn't really much of a figure yet, just the dream of one. In this free class, open to anyone and inside the back room at the local craft supply store, he doesn't interrupt the instructor or ask unnecessary questions. He listens and he folds, each step like a ritual, more sacred than a promise, a secret. The other students are here to indulge in a hobby, not the man. He's here to be reminded of what it means to love. His body, like a protective shield, crouches over the desk. His hands cover the completed paper creation. Slowly, he peeks between his fingers. As he does, he says a prayer. He asks that his lips will have the power to breathe life. When the instructor comes by to check on the man's progress, she notices his desk is already clean, except for the presence of his cupped hands. He nods. She thanks him for coming and goes on to the next student. When the man opens his hands and sees how his paper creation waves with surprisingly uncrooked arms, the man waves back and laughs at his paper boy, his paper son. The man gently tucks his paper inside the shirt's pocket. The man doesn't button the flap, so it's easier for him to look down inside the cotton crevice to see his paper son as he leaves the store. The rain catches the man by surprise when he steps outside. He runs to his truck and scrambles with his keys. When the man reaches in his pocket, his paper son is gone. Not gone, but gone enough. The perfect folds of his paper son are no more. His hands are no different from his head. He is translucent and ripped. The man waves at the boy again, but his son stays limp. The man scoops his son from the soaked corner of his wet shirt and holds him against the air conditioner. He doesn't come to, not even when he's dry. The man goes inside the store and asks the instructor if there's any way to repair the damage. She tells him there is not, but she reminds him that he now has the knowledge of how to create. She encourages him to try again. The man thanks her and explores the shelves for supplies. He buys 3 different kinds of paper. He can make another son, maybe a daughter. When the man is back at home, he sits at his kitchen table. He takes out the paper and begins drawing lines, but he can't stay focused. His hands shake. The paper tears and crumples. The man has no choice. He tosses the paper away. A few raindrops patter on the roof, and the man thinks of his son. He will every time it rains.
I think probably everyone tuning in right now can see exactly what I meant by these share some common blood, the magic and the rain and the artists who are performing for such small audiences. What beautiful readings. Thank you both.
Thank you.
I know that I would love to hear a little bit about how these books came into being over time.
So mine, the majority of the stories in this collection made up my thesis for my MFA. I think I added just 3 or 4 after that, but I think most of these I wrote during graduate school in New Orleans.
For me, I think the collection largely came out of failure, and I mean, in some kind of way. I know that sounds kind of ridiculous, but I was, early 20s. I was kind of trying to figure out my voice, writing different genres, just kind of experimenting to see what would catch, and then I sat down and wrote Restored. It's one of the stories in my collection. It's about halfway through, and I thought, this is really different from what I've written before, and I think it actually is more reflective of me than anything else I'd written before. It had magic in it. It was about loss, and it was about guilt, and it was about the really the themes that I think would come together to ultimately make my collection. So as I sat down, wrote another story, similar stuff, another story, similar stuff, and it kind of just found its way that way after experimentation with trying to find myself, I think.
Yeah, it's interesting you talk about the magic, and the first writer that I ever read that actually made me think that I would want to pursue even trying to write stories was Marquez, because I read his stories or his books, and I didn't know that like you were allowed to do that in fiction. I always thought that they had to be kind of these straightforward stories, and then I read his magical realism and thought like, okay, if you can do that with writing, then I want to give it a shot.
Yeah, Andrew, I think with Marquez, one story I really think of with his a lot is the handsomest drown man in the world, or the most handsome drown man in the world, whichever it is. And with that story, it has magic in it, but the magic is not overtly heavy. I think it's there, kind of on the outside, waiting for us to kind of be moved by it. It's almost an emotional kind of magic. I really like Marquez.
Yeah, it's one funny thing that he often said in interviews is they would ask him about the magic in his stories, and he would say that everything in his stories is real. Like he would claim that, and obviously it's not, but I think it's always something funny that he would say, and I think and one thing that I've noticed in your stories is that there are magical elements, but it's not heavy-handed. It's not overweight. Like it's not too much weight on the story. Is not on these magical elements. It's just kind of peppered in there in a way that like feels organic, and it feels like real characters with these little magical elements in.
Yeah, thank you for that. With yours as well, I mean, do you think of your own work as being magical realism, or do you? I kind of read it as Tennessee myth, just in my reading of it, which I don't even know if that's a term, but I was really interested in how you use magic.
Yeah, I like Tennessee myth. I like that. Great. I don't know. For me, if an image is interesting to me, I just want to put it in a story. And if it's a little magical, it's fiction, so we're allowed to do that. So if something's striking to me, I want to get it into a story. And that's Jenna mentioned the girl with the braided eyelashes, and that was the oldest image that I have. It came from a writing prompt in an undergraduate workshop in college at Charleston, and I just kept coming back to it because it just kept finding its way back into stories, and I just kept putting it in and trying to find a way to make it work. And I don't know if that answers your question at all. But.
Yeah.
One thing I am always super curious about when I read collections of short stories is the order of the stories, especially when we're talking about linked collections, where we have that image coming back again and again of that girl with the eyelashes. How much of that is author? How much of that is editor? And kind of the same question about the title of the book. How much of that was you? How much of that was the people you were collaborating with?
You want to take this one first, Bradley?
Yeah, I'll take it. The order of the collection was one of the most difficult things for me. With my collection, I want to make sure it was. I think tone is really what I'm really interested in whenever I read initially. And different people read for certain things, but I'm really interested in consistent tones. And I wanted to make sure that the movements from story to story really was not too harsh of a tonal shift. Although I think the whole collection has a really similar tone to it, but for me, that was what I was really focused on as I was putting the stories together. As far as my publisher editor had some suggestions, of course, for ordering and those kinds of things, but I think the manuscript I turned in at the end is the order that we went with. I think it worked well. One thing I do is I read aloud my work, and I know a lot of poets do that. I'm sure a lot of fiction writers do too, but it was something that I kind of wanted to employ to see if it would work well with what I was finally turning in. As far as the title of the story, I was reaching the end of my cycle. I knew my voice was kind of, I was starting to be finished with this first collection. I just knew it. I'd worked on it for 7-8 years. I could notice little hints that my voice was starting to explore different themes. I was starting to be more interested in experimentation, formatting, and styles. And I knew it was just time to end this first collection. I had no idea for a title. Titles are probably what I'm worst at, if I'm being honest. I give too much away, or something that's just doesn't work. I was just, and then I wrote Those Fantastic Lives. It came near the end of the cycle, and it had a line near the end of it that included the phrase "Those Fantastic Lives," and I thought, well, that actually works really well because we're dealing with the fantastic throughout most of the collection. And it is about fantastic lives, the good, the bad, pretty, the ugly, all those things. So I thought it really magically kind of came to me, I guess.
Yeah, so for me, and kind of to echo what Bradley was saying, the title of my collection comes from a story as well. And when I turned in the manuscript, I had a different title for the book. But we kind of thought maybe it wasn't the strongest, and one of my publishers just mentioned she really liked this line from one of the stories, and it kind of worked for the book, and that's what we ran with. As far as the order of the stories, it's very tonal, as Bradley was saying, and also with reading aloud, I do read aloud, and a lot of times for a specific story, reading aloud you'll notice, like if you reuse a word in consecutive sentences, or there's things you can notice, but then in looking at the collection as a whole, you can start realizing that, oh, this story had this detail in it, and the next story has that detail and the same detail, so you want to split them up or maybe move them around, or move stories together that have sort of same elements and tones in them. So yeah, it's the first time I've done this, so it was difficult, and I definitely got input from the publisher on story order. But it is a lot of trying to see, and you'll read a story back to back, and it just doesn't feel like they go together. So you'll move them around and kind of shuffle them up and see how it works.
Thank you. That's just always so interesting to me with collections of short stories. Because you are both in front of bookshelves right now, I want to ask about what you're reading. What are you reading now? What are some of your go-to favorites? What's sitting behind you on those shelves?
Well,
Andrew,
what I'm just reading is this book. So, yeah, I would suggest everyone go out and get it. It's great. But I'm actually, if I panned the camera around, we just moved into a new house, so it's just that's a temporary shelf, and everywhere else is just boxes of books that have not been taken out yet. So,
for me, I read a lot of story collections. I mean, that's really what my preference is. Becky Hagenston has a new book that's out this year called The Age of Discovery and Other Stories. I thought it was wonderful. Brenda Piatto has a book called The Rock Eaters, which I thought was another really good book. It's speculative, kind of magical realism, weird fiction stuff. And then, Andrew's book I think is wonderful. I read it a couple of weeks ago, and then I've been rereading a couple of the stories actually yesterday and today, just to be reminded of them. But yeah, those are my 3 favorite books of the year, actually.
Thank you. And this is a question completely inspired by you, Bradley. You had done a playlist to go along with your book, which is up at Large Hearted Boy, which is an online lit mag. And I've been listening to that for a couple of days and kind of sharing that headspace with you. And it's a great playlist. Everyone should go find it on Spotify. What are you listening to now? And what do you listen to when you write? Or is it silent when you write?
Oh, it's silent when I write. I have a fan going. That's it. I can't do any kind of anything really distracts me with sounds when I'm writing. It takes me forever, I think, to get in my writing space. I may sit down to write, and it may be an hour before I can actually get in the place where I'm trying to get. But yeah, when I'm writing, I don't listen to anything. Just in general, I listen to a lot of stuff that really fits the tone, I think, of what I'm writing. Mac Miller is who I probably listen to the most. There's just a sadness in that, and I like his music.
So for me, I'm similar. I get very distracted if I'm listening to music, but I found that if I can listen to stuff that doesn't have any lyrics or it's not in English, like there's a Icelandic band Siegrist that I listen to because I can't be distracted by the lyrics because I don't know what they're saying. And then there's a film composer named Max Richter. He does a lot of contemporary movies, and it's very like atmospheric compositions, and I can listen to stuff like that when I write, but nothing with lyrics in it that I can understand.
What cool insight, which kind of segues beautifully into my next question, which authors always get asked at events like these. Tell us about your writing practice. Besides your musical preferences, how do you get into your writing zone? How often do you write? Stuff like that.
It can be hard sometimes. I've gone, being an MFA program, you have to produce. So that helps me kind of stay focused for now. But there are times where I may go 2-3 months and I just have to step away from writing because I feel like too much of the stuff may be too similar, or it's too, my headspace is just not there. For the past month, I haven't been able to really write because I've been so focused with the book coming out. And I hope in the next couple of weeks I can kind of sit down and really focus on a new story. That's my goal, at least.
So for me, as far as the writing process, I start, and this is something I think you'll hear a lot of fiction writers say, is starting with like something very small, like a very specific image or a line of dialogue or a description of something, and then I just circle it. So like if it's whatever is interesting, if it's a child in a creek without shoes on or something like that, and then you just ask yourself, why are they there? Where did they come from? Where are they going? What time of day is it? What month is it? And you just keep circling that image with questions, and then the more you pile onto it, story will hopefully kind of evolve out of that. And that's sort of how I go about it.
Do you write every day, Andrew, or do you try to? Or
I try to. We're in the middle of a move, and I've got a 1-year-old daughter, so and then with the book, it's I'm gonna hopefully get back to an everyday writing pretty soon. But I can make time at night, and you can squeeze it in here and there.
Right.
Do you guys feel like the pandemic changed your writing practices at all?
I definitely do. I think um, I was telling someone the other day, I think a lot of people felt that when things went kind of into lockdown, you were just going to be super productive and just be cranking out work. And it, for me, felt sort of the opposite. And I don't know why that is, but yeah, I think I kind of slowed down during the pandemic as far as actually generating work. I do feel like I kind of had more ideas and I thought more about writing, but I wasn't actually putting as much down on paper as I thought I was going
to. For me, I was home just a lot, like everybody else was. And I think I actually wrote more stories during the past year and a half than I have in a long time. It gave my head some space to kind of be in the place where I write, and it worked well for me. It's terrible to sound that art came out of this kind of terrible moment for a lot of us, but it really gave me a lot of time to focus.
So these aren't stories they didn't make their way into the book.
No, these are new ones.
Okay, great.
And that's not terrible at all. Thank you for the art that's coming, because I think all of us need it after what we've been going through. This is kind of a follow-up question. I'm going to give credit where credit is due. Several years ago, I had the chance to introduce Kevin Wilson, and I asked him that question about writing practices, and he didn't like that question. So he answered a different question instead that was way better, and I've stolen it every year since. He talked about not just to the aspiring writers in the audience, but to the whole audience, about what it meant to him to be a good literary citizen. And I thought that was so cool, and I wondered what you might make of that term, to be a good literary citizen. How do you do that? How should the audience do that? How do we keep beautiful books like yours and amazing events like this? How do we keep them coming into the world?
I think now in sort of the age of like Instagram and social
media. One thing that I try to do is I try to cover as many. Are
we breaking up?
We lost you a little bit there, Bradley.
Am I
back?
You are.
Andrew, go ahead. My internet must be having problems. Sorry about that.
I think it's just championing other writers, and it's kind of now with Instagram and social media, it's kind of easy to do. If you read a book that you enjoy, you can post it. You can back in the day it was word of mouth, just telling people I just read this great book, or but now you have such a bigger platform to showcase fellow writers and help get the word out about books that you really love.
Yeah, I agree. Everything Andrew said with that, I totally agree with. I try to cover a lot of debuts as well with interviews or however I can. I especially try to help debut writers because I know it can be tough getting out there at the start for sure.
Do you remember what Kevin's answer was?
Oh man. He talked about attending the festival. He thanked the audience for attending, which I thought was like a really good move. And also he just encouraged all the writers in the audience to keep writing and keep trying, but even more so, all the readers in the audience keep reading. Because the more readers there are out there, the better off we all are.
With festivals, it's for readers and for writers. You get to be up close and personal. You can talk to your favorite writer. You can go have a beer after the event with someone whose book you just read, and you get to meet them and you get to find books you hadn't known about. And it's going to festivals is one of the greatest things you can do as a reader or as a writer.
Agree.
And then you get to brag to your friends, to your students about I'm emailing with these cool authors. They're like my friends now.
Yeah, you were talking about Ron Rash a minute ago, and I went to a literary event in Chattanooga, and we went to like an event afterwards, and he just came over and started talking to me and my friend, and then he brought over Charles Frazier and introduced him, and it's just like I'm just this like 22-year-old kid hanging out with Ron Rash and Charles Frazier. So it's a cool time for sure.
It's amazing.
Yeah.
Were you totally starstruck, or were you able to like play it cool?
Oh, I did not play it cool at all. I think we were kind of like orbiting around him the whole weekend, and finally he realized that we were, fans, and came over generously and talked to us.
Oh, that's so kind.
Yeah.
We have got a few questions coming in from the audience, so I'm going to throw those to you guys. Emily has asked about your use of foreshadowing. Is foreshadowing something that you plan on including as you're first thinking about a story, or is it something that you add back in after you've finished a draft?
I think for me, when I use foreshadowing, it would be before. I would personally have a harder time going back in to edit to include hints along the way, I think. For me, it would be a more organic kind of thing in my writing at the initial start of the story.
Yeah, I would agree. I think I don't plan on it. I think when it happens in a story, it's kind of as surprising for me as it is maybe for the reader. And yeah, I definitely don't go back and add any foreshadowing.
Do you plan the outlines for your stories, Andrew, or do you just go in and see where the image takes you?
I don't outline, and I kind of jump around all over the place. I mean, there are times where I know the last line pretty early on, and I kind of build towards it. And then there's sometimes where I write really chronologically. What about you?
I oftentimes know the last line and try to get my way there. I don't organize. I'm not good at organizing at all with stories. It never works for me when I try.
Yeah, I'm the same.
Got another question from Sherry Welton Wild. How much back and forth do you do with editors?
It depends on the magazine. Sometimes they don't have any notes, and sometimes you'll chat on the phone with them, and they want you to redo a scene or an ending or something. But for me, I haven't had a ton. Usually they take it pretty much as it is. And then with the book, that is obviously a little more extensive. They have quite a bit of notes, which is really helpful because my publishers are much smarter than I am, so they really helped in shaping the book up.
Yeah, same experience with me on that. And usually, I mean, a lot of the notes are simple things that really don't take that much time to correct. Every once in a while, you'll get something, kind of a larger issue to work with. But a lot of the notes are really pretty simple.
Yeah. But then a lot of times those little simple changes can really
that's true.
Shake the story up. So
both of you have already said that you're kind of in a pause for different reasons, with the book coming out, with moving. But what's coming next in terms of other publications, or in terms of what you're planning on sitting down to work with when you're back in the right headspace?
So for me, as I was saying about kind of hitting a brick wall with the pandemic, I have had something going on my head. So I think when I can sit down, it's a longer piece, and hopefully crank out what I would like to be a novel for my next project. So yeah.
A lot of the stuff I've been working on recently is more experimental. I have a story about it's in the form of a manual. I have a gameplay style story. I have a Flash in Questions that just came out at Ghost Parachute a couple of weeks back. So I'm really trying to do some different stuff and see if it works. That's kind of what I hope my next collection is, more experimental in that way, with form, and just kind of having some fun, seeing where it goes.
Can I ask you a question? So when you do experiment with the form, like you had a story in here that was an email chain. Do you start with that format, or do you start with the story and then like find what experimental format would fit the story?
I have to always start with the story first. If I don't, I get lost. If I just go in saying I'm going to do the story as gameplay style,
Yeah.
it just doesn't work for me that way. My brain always has to have the story first, I think.
And is it true, Bradley, that that Flash and Questions came out the day after your book came out? That like your first thing for your next collection came out the day after your first collection?
Yeah, that was a good feeling too.
I can't even imagine. Like 10 points. That's next level productivity. Becky Harbor is asking, oh, this is interesting. How do you decide what stories go into the collection? So what goes in and what does not go in?
I think I have a pretty boring answer, but it's the ones that I think are the best. There's a lot, especially, Bradley was saying that in graduate school you're having to crank out stories, and when you go to put the collection together, you read back through everything you have, and some of them just you don't want to put out there. And so that's my pretty simple answer.
Yeah, similar for me. I had several stories to kind of choose from and at different versions, I had different stories included in the collection. I think my largest point, I had maybe 23 that I was going to have with the collections. No, it's too long for what I wanted to do because I really wanted this collection to be slim. I thought it worked better as a slim collection. So it just goes through and deciding what fits everything else and what doesn't. There were a couple stories that I have that I really liked, but I just didn't feel like they were right for this particular collection. So it was hard in that way.
We have had a couple of questions about working collaboratively with editors, but I'm curious who else you work with. Do you have other readers or writing groups that see your stuff before anyone else?
So I've had a couple writing groups. I have one really close friend. He's a writer, James A. Jordan. You should check him out. But we went to graduate school together, and we'll try to do like little weekends, and we give each other prompts, and we exchange stories. And so I have a close friend that I show a lot of stuff to and bounce things off of.
With the MFA experience, I'm sure Andrew has the same kind of or similar kind of experience with, a lot of people are reading your work and you're getting feedback from peers and, professors as well. So that's obviously been a benefit of being in a program. My wife reads my stories, I don't know how fair that is to have someone so close reading your work to evaluate it, but I mean, that's the reality for me. Those are the people who read my stories.
Yeah, and I'll show mine to my partner as well and get her feedback. And as far as MFA, one really great thing about being an MFA is you get to meet these people, and then after you're done, you can keep in contact and keep having people to send stories to. Because a lot of times, for me at least, before being in that program, like I didn't really have anyone to show my work to. I didn't really have anyone to talk to about writing, and so making those contacts, and then I would encourage anyone in MFA to keep those contacts after you're out, because it'll help keep you writing.
Yeah, the community's been that's been one of the greatest things from the MFA experience for me, is having that group of people who are willing and able, and they just want to read and talk about stories. So it's really been a wonderful kind of thing.
Yeah, I agree.
With both of you coming from an MFA background and a workshop background there, are there any particular, did you have any aha moments in terms of feedback from peers? Is there any one piece of feedback that has stuck in your brain, or was it just the experience in general that was so valuable?
That's a good question. I'm trying to think.
Or alternatively, any real zingers that you'll just never forget.
I feel like my experience, my whole time with my MFA has actually been during COVID. So we've all done everything over not Ring Central. That's the platform we use. So it's everything is virtual. So it's been really interesting in that way to kind of to just have the experience in a virtual kind of format.
I'm trying to think as far as aha moments. I think one, and this didn't happen to me, so I hate taking credit for it, but there was a story that was being workshopped, and the writer came in and said, I love the characters, I love the dialogue, I love like everything that's going on. You know, I'm really interested in this story I'm writing, but I don't know what happens. There were two characters in a truck driving, and they were talking, and the atmosphere was great, and the dialogue was great. But he said, I don't know what the story is, I don't know where they're going, I don't know where they came from. And someone just kind of asked, he said, what's in the bed of the pickup truck? And the writer said, I don't know, why do you ask that? And he said, well, you said they were in a pickup truck, not a car. I was just wondering what's in the back. And he said, I don't know. And then we left, and that was it. And the next week he came back and he said, I finished the story, I figured it out. And we're like, well, how'd you figure it out? And he said, well, I figured out what was in the bed of the pickup truck. And then he said, as soon as he figured that out, the whole story unraveled. He understood where they were going, what the conflict was, where they'd come from. And so I think that's something that I always, I've also heard writers talk about asking what's in your character's pocket or what's in the bedside table. Like, what are the physical objects surrounding the scene? Because those can often inform what the conflict is, what the story is, what the characters want, what the characters are doing. So I think what's in the bed of the pickup truck would be my aha moment from a workshop.
That's such a good one. We have just a couple minutes left in our session, so we have time for probably one, maybe two more questions. Isaiah over in the chat has asked, when you are writing, do you pull parts of your own lives into your stories?
Oh, for sure. And I'll put little like inside jokes. Like I'll name characters after friends or my niece, or I'll name a bridge after someone from high school. Like just little things so that when I know my friends are reading it, they'll kind of laugh and get that little inside joke. But then also, as any writer does, you'll be overhear someone at a restaurant, a little bit of dialogue, and you'll jot it down and you'll put it in a story, or you'll hear someone telling a story and you'll take details and steal them. And yeah, so definitely.
Yeah, same. I mean, the whole world is in ways inspiration, I think, for a lot of writers. The themes I think that are reflected in my stories are the things that I think about the most, just as a person in this world. So yeah, very much so.
And you sometimes feel like a crazy person because you'll be at a funeral or you'll be in a situation where someone's like spilling their heart out to you, and you'll be like, oh, I could use that in a story. And it's like a totally inappropriate moment to be mining details for stories, but you can't stop your brain from doing it.
Yeah.
I think, though, that's the same thing that Bradley was talking about earlier, making art out of the pandemic and feeling oddly guilty about it, but it's actually like good for everyone else who gets to read it. So thank you for mining those moments. Those of us who get to read it really are grateful for it. We have reached the end of our time, so I'm going to end with just a couple reminders. You can buy these lovely books from Parnassus Books, and that will in turn support our official bookseller and support the festival. You can also make a donation to Humanities Tennessee at their website and support all of their great programs, including the festival. Again, thank you so much to both of you, Bradley Sides, Andrew Siegrist, for being here today and sharing your time with us. I appreciate it so much. I know the audience appreciates it so much. Today is the very last day of the festival, but there are still a few more events, I believe, after this one. So check out the schedule, enjoy the rest of the festival, and don't forget to buy the books. That's the most fun part, is the book haul afterward, I think, anyway.
Thanks, Jim, for having us.
Thank you.